The further south you get, the more rifles you see. But that don't necessarily mean you're much more protected from the mysterious and horrifying things that lurk out here. From unsettling apparitions to swamplands haunted by creatures of legend, these are allegedly true ghost stories from the deep south. And if y'all want some southern fried folklore, you should look into the legend of Bloody Bones. If you've got a story of your own to share, send it to us at darkstories.org. I'd love to hear your alien abduction accounts and experiences with seeing disturbing things at lakes and rivers. Be sure to follow the Darkness Prevails podcast on Spotify and iTunes too, and leave us a review on iTunes if you don't mind. Thank you. Now, let's begin. Nighttime Horror from Anonymous. I never believed in the paranormal, but now I'm starting to question my own beliefs. For summer vacation, I decided to visit Shreveport, Louisiana, close to the river. I chose to stay at a quaint but pleasant motel located on Highway 80, an aging place run by a very pleasant family. The first few nights were normal, and the cozy room was a great place to get some shut-eye after daytime summer fun activities. However, things started to get unusual. I would awake in the middle of the night around 3 a.m. and feel some presence near me. It felt like a large person was sitting on the mattress. Sometimes it would be on the right side, sometimes on the left, and a couple of times the entity seemed to lay across my legs, which totally freaked me out. But every time I would push it out of my mind and continue to sleep. That was until my last night there. I was having trouble falling asleep this time, and I'd even put in my earphones to listen to some Darkness Prevails posts. This always helps me get to sleep. Just as I could feel my eyelids getting heavy, losing consciousness, I was abruptly woken by a noise on the opposite side of the room. It sounded like a woman's voice, uttering a short phrase, but it was so muffled I couldn't make out what she was saying. I just wrote it off, assuming it was some loud lady in the room next door. About 10 seconds later, it happened again, coming halfway across the room. It was getting closer. Wide awake, I didn't even have time to react before it spoke again, less than an inch away from my right ear. The voice spoke to me, warning me.
"You're next."
I immediately jumped up from the bed, looking wildly around, heart beating so fast it hurt, faster than it ever had before. But there was nothing. I looked all about the room, but there was no sign of anything having been there. I slowly went back to bed. I eventually got relaxed and finished up the video, putting me to sleep. I woke up the next day and checked out, forgetting most of what had happened the night before. Recently, I researched the motel online, just curious about how long it had been in business, when I found a disturbing post. A legal report I found on Google said there had been a crime committed there, so I clicked on it. As it turned out, decades ago, a person had been ended in a room 2 doors down, with the previous owners finding the remains when they entered the room for housekeeping. I was shocked, and suddenly all of the experiences I had made sense. If you ever come to Shreveport, just be careful. This city is a strange one. Hell House from Uncle T. This dates back some years ago when we had to move to Orange, Texas, and we had a house in Logansport, Louisiana. My dad got a phone call that the house in Logansport had been broken into, and so they went up there to check out what had been messed up or stolen or destroyed. When they arrived, they started going through things, seeing what all was missing and cleaning things up. While cleaning things out of my sister's room, They found an old Ouija board that was given to her when she was a young girl by a step-aunt for her birthday. Because my family was very religious, my dad decided that he was going to get rid of it. He had always heard that if he threw it away, they would always return to the owner, and so he decided that he would burn it. He went on up to my grandmother's house, his mother, to find the stuff to burn it with. He commenced to lay it on the ground and tried to light it with a match, but the match went out. He then went into the garage and found some charcoal lighter fluid. He proceeded to pour it onto the box and tried to light it. Needless to say, it was not lighting. He used almost a whole bottle and a box of matches, but it didn't work. So my dad, being a believer in prayer, he began to pray and ask God for help and guidance. He walked back into the garage and found some lawnmower gas and took the lid off the box, laying the board on top, crossways, and filled the bottom of the box with gas. He then poured a bit on the board as well, then began to pray. He struck a match and held it to the board. Gas usually ignites from the fumes, but he still had to hold it to the board as he prayed. Then the board began to burn in the center, not on the edge where the match was. So he and my sister backed away as the board was burning, and without warning, the fire exploded straight up into the air. A loud scream was coming from inside the board, louder and louder. Then the fire fell to the ground with a rumble. Smoke as black as the night began to move toward my dad from every direction. It just kept coming at him. He even put the wind at his back, but the darkness followed him. Suddenly, with one final scream, it was gone. The board and box were just gone, leaving a small bit of ash and an indentation in the ground where the board had been. After all that, they came home to Orange, Texas, and we went to church the next day. Everything was good, or so we thought. When we got home from church, we got out of the car and walked to the house, but none of the keys would work on any of the 4 doors. My dad then remembered the one door that led to the kitchen. It wasn't in good shape, so my dad could just bust in and replace it later. He proceeded to push on the door to gain access. When you push on things, they tend to fall away from you. But as he pushed on the door, the window shattered out onto him, as if something had been thrown out of it. We go inside and my dad feels like something is running down his leg, so he sits in the recliner and removes his slacks he wore to church. Blood was pouring out of a wound on his leg, but he never felt any pain from it. It had bled so much that he could pour the blood from his shoe like he were pouring a drink. He had no snag in his slacks, no blood on any glass, no meat from the wound. By the way, it was 2 to 3 inches long and 1 inch wide, and at least 1 inch deep. It was definitely not some little cut. We bandaged him up and tried to make the best of the rest of the day. Little did we know it was the beginning of a lifetime of hell on earth. The demon house is what we called it. We had no way of moving because we had rented the place from my step-grandfather, because my dad's job relocated him where they needed him. We lived with it for, best I can remember, another 5 or so years, until we were older and out of school. My dad will not talk about it to this day. He is in his 80s. When I ask him or even mention the indecent, he begins to pray and walks away. My sister is the same way. I've learned to deal with a lot from spirits, shadows, dreams, and even demons. I'm 46 now as I write this to share with you. Funny how I can see these events play in my mind over and over, but I can barely remember my birthday at times. I am a preacher now, have been for about 5 years. Still have things happen that I talk to my dad about, and more to share if it interests you. From dreams of being crucified by demons to my house burning down just last year, and things that happened in that house before that day. After my father was attacked, after the Ouija board was burned, that's when strange things began to happen. We lived in a duplex that my step-grandfather let us rent from him. They were old naval barracks houses that he purchased. We rented both sides and made it one big home. Sometime after, we noticed that weird things were happening around the house. It was late one night and my dad and I were in the living room, sitting on the couch and watching TV, when we heard clicking coming from what we thought was the wall. The couch was located next to the front door of the main entrance to the home. It was wintertime, and all the house was closed up and sealed because of drafts, and these were old houses. We covered the windows with plastic wrap and duct tape. Well, there was one radiator heater that we used because of natural gas prices. Anyway, the clicking got louder and louder. Then the front door just opened. The main lock was still locked, sticking out, not bent or broken, just like it was locked but not shut. The thing is, it's a barrel lock. You lift and slide to latch it. My dad got up, and there was like this blast of cold air that went through him, but the glass outer door was still closed. So where did the blast of cold air come from? He stumbled back and looked at me. He was confused by what had happened. He closed the door again and locked it. Then he sat back down. That's when he took a piece of paper and put it in the doorway of my sister's room to check for drafts. We sat down on the couch to watch TV again. Suddenly, my dad says to me, "Watch the paper. It's moving." When I turned my head to watch the paper, it wasn't moving. I thought my dad was messing with me and trying to scare me, so I said sure and turned back to watch TV. Again, my dad said the paper was moving. Once more, I turned to look at the paper, yet it wasn't moving. He said to watch it out of the corner of my eyes, to not move my head. I did as he said, and he was right. It moved a lot, but when we moved our heads, it stopped. So my dad said just stare at it and see what happens. The paper goes absolutely insane, swinging around violently. Then it stopped and began to spin like a top. My dad got up to see if there was a draft, and it stopped again. There was no draft anywhere. The door flew open, the barrel latch still in the lock position. That night after my family got home, we went to bed. At one point in the night, my brother came to my room and said to leave him alone, to go to sleep. I'd already been sleeping and had no idea what he was talking about. He asked me, "How did you get from Tim's room so fast?" I replied, "What are you talking about?" He proceeds to explain, "You were jumping on my bed, and when I turned over, you ran into Tim's room." Tim is a cousin that lived with us at the time. "Go back to sleep. You're having a bad dream," I said to him. He stated, "How can it be a dream when I'm awake?" We all go back to bed when I hear him run into Tim's room and flick the light on. He starts yelling at Tim and talking about me. I walk down the hall and ask what now. He said that someone was jumping on his bed. We looked around and saw nothing. So I go and lock my door and go back to bed. As I lie there trying to sleep with my music playing on my headboard, I noticed that my door began to rattle. I yelled towards the door, telling them to leave my door alone. It stopped. I lay there some more trying to fall asleep, but then it shakes violently this time. I yell out to stop, but then I hear glass shattering. I get up and turn my light on, and I see that my full-length mirror has been shattered, spiderwebbed-like. Something or someone had punched it. Although nothing else happened that night, I didn't sleep. I told my dad about it, but I never took it down. The next day was Saturday. My brother, my cousin, and I were at the house alone. I was smaller then, and when the heater went off and cooled enough, I would sit on top of it. But that day I chose to lean against it. I was making my mother's owl wind chimes ring out. They were ceramic, so it was a peaceful tone. Suddenly, we heard a loud crash in the back part of the house. We walked into our rooms to see what it may have been. There was nothing in my room and nothing in my cousin's room, but my brother called us to come see. Let me paint this picture for you. My brother made the living room his bedroom. Now his room was larger than a regular bedroom. He had a lot of figurines of eagles and trophies. On top of his chest of drawers, he placed a mirror that was for a dresser. The mirror took 2 people to put on the chest of drawers, and it was across the room in a chair face down, not broken, just out of place. None of the trophies or figurines had been moved. We know that because my brother never dusted anything, and nothing else was out of its dust. It was overwhelming to say the least, but we dealt with it. Dad was the only person hurt by whatever this was. Well, unfortunately, I was the next target. For a while, not much was happening out of the norm of lights being turned on by themselves or stuff being moved. One night, I had my first encounter with sleep paralysis, and it wasn't fun. It scared me. I had fallen asleep with my lights on and had awakened in my bed, but I could not move. I could look around with my eyes. Not moving my head, I noticed black spots floating all around the room on the bed, the walls, the ceiling, all over. Suddenly, my arms shot straight out to the side of the bed, pulled tightly. My legs had been stiffened and placed one on top of the other, foot propped on top of the other foot. I then saw a huge black shadow floating from my feet just up to my face. It rolled to show a skeleton face, laughing like I'd never heard before, and my head fell to the left side. I then started having agonizing pain in my hands and feet. The pain was intense, and before I blacked out from the pain itself, my side began to throb with such an ache I cried. Then it was like when you come up out of the water gasping for air. I was trying to catch my breath and the pain was still there. It was days before it went away. I told my dad what had happened, and he said I'd been crucified. They are after me for some reason. We stayed in that house for about 8 or 9 years, dealing with things. My sister moved and my cousin moved back to his mom and dad's house. My brother graduated, and I quit school. My mom, dad, and brother moved back to Louisiana to the old home place. I stayed with friends for another year or so. As for the hell house, the demon house, my step-grandfather sold it, but the people moved out a year later. They had the house burned and refused to sell the land. They wouldn't say why, but I think I know. To this day, I have dreams about angels and demons, about ghosts and the hell house. Things tend to follow me, but it doesn't scare me like it used to. Did I mention that I'm a clergyman now? But that doesn't stop them. Until I remember more things, I'll say for now good day, and may God protect you. I swear I'm not crazy. From Midnight Raider. I'm a girl, 18 now, but this all started when I was younger. When I was 6 years old, I moved to Powder Springs, Georgia. We moved into a completely developed 3-story house that was part of a larger neighborhood. It was a very well-built area, and was the last place someone would expect for something like this to happen. The first incident was when I was 8. I was heading down my basement steps to feed my pet rabbit at the time. Halfway down the steps, the wall breaks apart into railing to give you a view of the hallway in which my rabbit's cage was located. Upon reaching the halfway mark, I looked towards my pet as it was completely silent, and that was very unusual for him. I stopped mid-descent. In that hallway was a shadow of a man walking past my rabbit and straight towards the end of the stairs. I remember the horror I felt upon seeing this thing getting closer and closer. I ran back up the stairs, leaving my rabbit and slamming the basement door in the process, only to be questioned by my father as to what was wrong. I did not tell him. Even at this age, I knew he would think I was crazy if I said anything about what I saw. Eventually, this incident passed, and it seemed to be a one-time thing. But I was wrong. A few years later, I was 11. My friend and I could hear someone in the woods calling my brother's name. This was unusual as he has special needs, and not many people know him. My friend and I, let's call her Maddie, decided to head into the woods to figure out what was happening. It was about 6 p.m., and the sun was starting to set. We entered the woods and began to walk, when suddenly I saw something. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a little boy hiding behind a tree. He was Caucasian and had a white t-shirt on and black shorts. But when I went to look at him, he was gone. I hoped it was some kind of trick of the light, but what I saw was not what I thought. I didn't tell my friend what I'd seen, as to not scare her, and because I wasn't even sure if I saw what I saw. Throughout our walk, I saw him several more times. Every time he was peeking out from various objects, watching us. I turned to Maddie and told her we should head back. She agreed. On our walk back, I asked her if she had seen anything strange. What she said sent chills down my spine. She described the same boy in the same clothing to me, exactly the same way I saw him, but at different times. I then told her that I saw him too. While this was creepy, we decided to brush the incident off and continue with our sleepover. We began to swim in the pool in my backyard with a light still in the sky. We were taking turns jumping into the deep end, and I was first. But right as I hit the water, I heard Maddie scream. I quickly swam up to the surface, only to see the little boy walking by my backyard fence, but that was not what my friend was screaming about. I asked her what was wrong, and she said that she had seen the little boy inside my basement window, staring out towards us, watching us. We were freaked out, but thankfully the rest of the night went by without incident. The next event happened when I was 14. My friend Rebecca was spending the night. Everything was normal and we got through the night without any problems, but when I woke up, she was terrified. She said that she had awakened sometime in the night, only to see what she thought was me standing outside. She could not see details, merely a shadow. But I was asleep right across from her. She had eventually fallen back asleep somehow. 2 months later, I had another friend spend the night. Just as before, the night went by with no occurrences, but when I woke up, my friend had a strange look in her eyes. I asked her what was wrong. She told me how she thought she had seen me standing in the doorway sometime in the night. She had awakened, and when she did, she saw that shadow just standing there. She knew it wasn't me, as she was right next to me. This friend was not Rebecca. This friend had no knowledge of what had happened a few months before, and yet she had seen something extremely similar to what Rebecca had seen. 2 years passed once again, and the only occurrences were the sounds of occasional footsteps and voices. I was 16 now. It was around 11 p.m. at night. My cat and I were heading upstairs for the night when we both froze in our tracks. We had both heard it, so I knew I was not imagining it. From the main floor, we had heard what sounded like a little girl's laughter. Let it be clear, I have no sisters, and no TVs or radios were on at the time. Nothing could have made that noise. My cat and I both ran to my bedroom, locking ourselves in there for the night. I'm 18 now, and things are still happening. Shadows and noises I can't explain. However, nothing significant has happened yet. But even then, I can't be alone in my basement at night. There's just something wrong about it. You feel as if you're not alone. You can feel eyes on you. And I know I'm not the only one. My friends refuse to be down there alone without the lights on. They too can feel it. Most of which don't even know about the past occurrences. I'm not crazy. I know there is something here. I know I've seen something I can't explain. Les Loups-Garous, from Anonymous. I want to start off by saying this. I'm no author by any means. This occurred over this past summer, and although it seems all over the place, This story really happened to me and my cousins. Now, I recently moved back home from Mississippi to my small town in northern Louisiana. I wasn't on any drugs when this happened. It was late one night and I was up with two of my cousins. I, unfortunately, suffer from insomnia and often stay up past sunrise. Me and my oldest cousin, Jack, were chilling on my bed while my younger cousin, Brad, was playing on the Xbox. We live in a 2-story house that is over 100 years old, and being so old it tends to show its age, such as the old rattling windows, squeaky floors, and all the other bells and whistles. At one point, I got up off the bed and went to use the bathroom, while Jack was hogging my vape. I get back from the bathroom and notice that the outside lights are on. They're motion detection lights, and assuming that it's just one of the cats or a raccoon, I think nothing of it. The window closest to my bed overlooks the side yard, and 50 yards away is my neighbor's house, with a small dinky little fence in between. I looked out the window while putting my phone on the charger, and I noticed that the light had just turned back on. I thought it was odd, but once again I shrugged it off. Just as I set my phone down, I cracked the window open a bit to get some fresh air on this hot summer night. After opening it, I realized that the outside was silent, like the quiet place kind of silent. I tap Jack on the shoulder and ask him if he feels odd. He replies with, "A little bit. I was about to ask you the same thing." After he says this, I get a wave of chills over my body, and my eyes wander around the side yard. From the window, you can also see the road in the front yard and the orange glow of the old crooked streetlight. Across the road is a road sign for "Turn up ahead." These details may seem unnecessary, but they will become relevant later. As I'm looking out the window in front of my neighbor's yard, I can see a dog poking its head out from behind a tree. This came as a shock because there are no stray dogs in our town, and the size of the head on this one made me think it was a German Shepherd. Even though I've only been here for 3 weeks, I know most everyone, and I know that there is no big stray dog roaming the night. I tell Jack to look out the window, but before I could finish the sentence, I locked eyes with the dog. At that point, I felt a wave of dread and regret wash over me. Jack then looked at me, waiting for the rest of that sentence. Then he looked out the window to stare at what I was looking at. He exclaimed, "What the heck?" He stands up while putting his hand on my shoulder. Instinctively, in the worst fight-or-flight moment, I close the window all the way to lock it, and I close the curtains. Brad, being confused, asked, "What's going on?" But I shushed him, turning off all the lights and sitting on the bed. I did these things because as Jack stood up, the dog stood up from behind the tree. Just for reference, the tree it was behind was next to the little fence. I'm 6'4", and the fence still comes up to my elbows. When this thing stood up, the fence was below its waist. Brad was confused about the whole situation, and we explained to him that there was a man outside and we needed to be quiet. I really don't know why we told him this, because it was still scary, but would you believe someone if they told you a werewolf was in the neighborhood, just saying hi? After that, he started to freak out, and I had to calm him down to the best of my ability. I told Jack and Brad to stay quiet. I looked out the window to see if it had left. When I took a peek, it was no longer behind the tree, but instead directly below the window. It was looking upwards towards me, and when it found my eyes, it talked. It was speaking in the deepest, darkest voice I'd ever heard. Imagine this, the lead singer of Disturbed mixed with the voice of Optimus Prime. At first, I couldn't understand what it was saying or trying to do, but the voice slowly morphed into a very familiar one.
What the heck?
It was Jack's voice, or it was supposed to be. It was like a recorded video taken the exact moment Jack had said that earlier. I nearly messed myself. And this creature, this thing, it knew that I was scared out of my body. It freaking smiled at me and waved with long daggers it called fingers. Now, looking at this thing beneath the window, all the details shining like Halley's Comet, its head was massive, easily the size of a moose if not bigger. Its body was like that of a bodybuilder's, toned and muscular. Its legs were bent back like a dog's would be. It had no tail, and it was all chocolate brown. Its eyes, though, they weren't glowing like you hear in stories. Its eyes were just like mine. Green, and they looked like a human's would. After I comprehended this monstrosity that was below me, it turned on a dime and bolted across the street. My eyes followed it the whole way, and when it got to the other side of the street, it stopped at the sign. Now I had a better idea at this thing's height. The sign was 6'10", and this thing was easily a foot taller. I slowly looked back at the thing, and it waved again, slowly walking backwards into the woods. It took me a few seconds to snap back to reality, but when I did, I turned around and Jack and Brad were both to my right, looking out the window too. Needless to say, we stayed up the rest of that night. The next morning I had to go to my grandpa and grandma's house to help take care of my dear granny. When I got there, I was tired out of my mind, but I sucked it up and took care of the things that needed to be done. Before I got ready to go, I sat down on the couch and talked to my granny. We went on tangents about the most random topics until dogs got brought up. I told my granny about a massive dog me and my cousins saw last night, and she looked at me in an odd way. I asked if something was wrong, and she replied with,
"So, you saw him, didn't you?"
Hearing this come out of her mouth shocked me. I then asked, "What do you mean?" She then said,
"You saw him. Last night you saw the loup-garou."
I looked at her like a little kid looks at their father for the first time since he was shipped off to war. She then tells me more about this loup-garou.
The loup-garou is an urban legend, a story only mothers tell their teenagers so they don't sneak out. Well, let me tell you, hun, the legend isn't so urban. I first experienced him when I was your age. I was out with my gals having the night out. We stopped at a local park right around 12 in the morning. We sat for a while. It was a hot summer night, so we had our windows rolled down. I noticed there were no crickets chirping, no bugs buzzing, no other cars around. I felt chills that night, and instinctively I looked to my right at the edge of the woods. I met eyes with him. He was tall, muscular, and very dark. All of a sudden, my friend screamed, and the next thing that happened was nothing short of crazy. Le loup-garou howled like a wild animal, but at the lowest pitch imaginable. It sounded like a boat horn mixed with a howl. He then bolted into the woods, and I thought I would never see him again. That was until last night.
After hearing her say that last sentence, I turned pale as a ghost.
Last night, right at 12 a.m., I heard a knocking at the back door. It started soft and gradually became louder, almost turning into the sound of a battering ram. I rushed out my bedroom door, thinking your grandpa had locked himself out. But as I left the bedroom, I turned around and realized he was sleeping next to where I was just lying down. I then wonder if there's a neighbor in distress, so I run as quickly as I can to the back door.
For reference, the door is a patio-type door with lots of rectangular windows.
I turn on the back porch light and peek through the blinds. I nearly dropped dead when I saw a pair of eyes that matched my own, staring back at me. I was in a state of shock, awe, and fear when I realized who this was. I heard a noise coming from the other side, and it sounded like a low growl, but it slowly started to sound like you, my dear. It said in a perfect recreation of your voice,
It's hot outside, Granny. Please let me in so I can cool off.
I nearly had a stroke right then, right there. Looking into my eyes, he could see the fear, and he smiled a sharp, toothy grin. He then said,
See you soon, hon.
And your voice then ran across my porch into the darkness in a flash.
I was shocked. I had no idea that my poor granny had endured the same gut-wrenching fear that I had the previous night. Still in a state of shock, I asked her, how does it mimic our voices? She told me she didn't know, but told me to stay aware, because the only way it can get in your home is by using your misjudgment against you. Hearing all of this, I get up and hug my granny, then leave. What puzzled me was how it got from my house to my granny's in one night. We live a good hour apart, and if I saw him at around 12:30, how did he cover that ground so quickly? As I was thinking about the whole situation, I had the same feeling of dread wash over me as I'm turning off the highway. I go to check all my mirrors, and as soon as I look out my right one, I see him. The toothy snout, the human eyes, and the massive head was keeping pace with my truck. I started to speed up, almost 65 on these old country roads, and I can't shake him. I then feel the weight shift on the bed of my truck, and in my rearview mirror I see the condensation on the glass. Through the back glass of the truck I hear my name being called in my granny's voice, and then a deep, dark laugh. I start praying aloud. Before I could comprehend what just happened, all of a sudden the truck shifted back to the way it was before. I looked in the mirror, and nothing was there, no condensation, no snout, just the dark, cloudy night behind me. I make it home safe and surprisingly fell asleep very quickly. The next day, me and Jack spread ashes around all the entrances of the house. Completely his idea, not mine, and I feel stupid not thinking about it. We prayed and brought a pastor to the house. He blessed the property. Since doing all these precautions, we haven't seen him around here or Granny's house since, and hopefully it stays that way.